I feel like 2020 is kind of the gift that keeps on giving in terms of stressful scenarios that we all have to keep slogging through. Most recently, we've been dealing with the riots and protests in the wake of the grim killing of George Floyd. There's a lot of different things coming up because of all of this, and it is in many different ways draining to one's mental health. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about that, and some ways to try to mitigate all of this when we can. Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. As is often the case, I came across an article that inspired the topic for this video. We'll go over it a little bit more in the talk after the intro because I want to keep this segment a little bit more generalized. But just to get me started, I'm going to read the opening line. My book is coming out in a few months, and I don't know if I'm going to be alive to see it because I'm a black man. Before I go any further, I recognize that this is one of those subjects where no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to please everyone no matter how you approach it. And in fact, that's a lesson that I want to model to all of you today as well. But I'll touch on that in the second half of this introduction. I'm just going to hold my nose and dive into this murky pool over here first. So I'm going to try as much as possible to stick to statistics for this initial part. First, I want to state that yes, there is absolutely a known bias in the police and legal system against black individuals. They are more likely to be racially profiled, they are more likely than white individuals to go to jail for the same crimes, and despite making up only 13.4% of the population in the US, they represented 24% of the proportion of police shooting deaths. We've seen several stories coming out of unnecessary police brutality against black individuals, including people who were unarmed and even people who were sitting peacefully in their own home not hurting anyone else. None of this is okay, and I'm sure that most of us can agree that it's not hard to find examples where police jump to violent actions far more quickly than the situation calls for. However, let's take a few steps back and look at the whole picture. First of all, I hope it goes without saying that I'm not trying to imply that police brutality is okay in any instance, not just in cases involving black individuals. Also, I'm not one of those people who likes to broad brush any group, so you won't hear me saying that all cops are equally bad either. Furthermore, it is an unfortunate reality at this time that black people are significantly more likely to live in impoverished conditions in the US, owing to many reasons, including growing up in single-parent households, exposure to gang culture and violence, poor education and job prospects, and poor social mobility as a result. All of these things contribute to an increase in crime in these communities. Unfortunately, this creates a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario where increased crime results in more shoddy, more dangerous neighborhoods where children are more likely to be exposed to it, are more likely to then go on to perpetuate that culture, are more likely to be racially profiled by the police, and are more likely to face unnecessary police brutality. So this all sounds quite grim, right? And in many ways it is. But is it grim enough to warrant a statement like, I don't know if I'm going to be alive to see it because I'm a black man? Or as he says later in the article, as a black man, what I actually feel constantly is the fear of death? Well, even when presented with scary graphs like this one that show an enormous spike in the rate of police killings for black people, looking at the actual number of people killed, and curiously, they don't specify the time span this graph covers, because if you scroll up to the top of this page, it says only 1,033 people have been killed by the police in the last year, so these numbers don't line up. You see that despite the high rate, only 1,293 black people have died. Now, in contrast, looking at the numbers of murders in a given year will show numbers like the following. 2,870 black people died as a result of murder this year, with 2,570 of those being at the hands of other black people. Now, I'm not trying to imply anything there. Most murders are intraracial. This has been reflected in the data for a long time. After all, a lot of the time, people most commonly interact with others of their own race. Nor am I trying to diminish the importance of challenging unnecessary police brutality. What I am trying to do here is challenge the melodramatic statement that I don't know if I'm going to be alive to see it because I'm black. The numbers I have shown reflect biases that need to be addressed, but the point still stands that 235 Black victims of police shooting in 2019 does not justify rocking back and forth in the corner of your apartment waiting for your door to be kicked down. It's kind of like someone looking at the fatal car crash statistics in a given year, which, incidentally, was a lot higher than the number of fatal police shootings at just over 38,000, and saying, I don't know if I'm going to survive my morning drive to work. Most times, people are not using this kind of thinking to make alterations to their situation to make themselves safer. It's not a deliberate or helpful thought process that culminates in a reasonable and expected conclusion. It's catastrophizing about a worst-case scenario. It's ruminating on elements of a situation that are relevant to one's own personal life circumstances and picking out how those elements are likely to lead to one's inevitable doom. I'll say it again. We know the biases in the police force. We know that unfortunately many, certainly not all, Black people are living in conditions that exacerbate the likelihood that they will encounter this police bias. But this is not, or should not, be enough to create and maintain a fear like this. This is getting into phobia territory. And, well, let's just say that phobias are rarely any good for one's mental health. There's a difference between recognizing an issue and saying, let's take some steps to address why this is the way that it is, and then using said issue to unnecessarily fret about surviving to see next Tuesday. But this is not the only mental health issue that I'm wanting to address. In relation to all of this is the one that I alluded to earlier. You can't please everyone no matter what you do. After all, the other half of everything going on right now involves the demands of people protesting. Let's just say these demands have seemed less than consistent. There are calls for police reform, calls for defunding the police, calls for disbanding the police, demands for various kinds of support from people. People are defacing statues, whether those statues had anything to do with the slave trade or not. Claims that this is intrinsically a racial matter with a dramatic amount of calls of racism swirling around. Claims that if you criticize the people using the protest for looting, you don't actually care about the lives lost to police brutality, as though those two statements are mutually exclusive. Furthermore, calls that if certain things are not done, then that makes the person or institutions not doing them racist, or if certain things are done, that is also racist, or at the very least patronizing and demeaning rather than being supportive. To say nothing of all of this happening simultaneously with the COVID situation. One week we hear that seeing 2 other people in your backyard is irresponsibly risking the lives of others, and then the next we get an endorsement that we are allowed to spend time outdoors in groups of 12, but to protest in groups of 100. All of the nurses and doctors that were previously saying, I'm here on the proverbial battlefield for you, stay home for me, are now saying white coats for Black lives and gathering in large groups of people. Regardless of your position in all this, it's easy to feel the following things. 1. There's no consistency in any of this. 2. I can do nothing right now because someone is always going to criticize some element of my beliefs or actions. 3. Totally confused and conflicted because there are so many political balls being juggled right now, and many of them intersect with others in ways that don't necessarily harmoniously exist. For example, I support people's right to protest, but I don't support people foolishly gathering together during a pandemic. Or, I support police reform, but I don't support people needlessly generalizing the actions of the violent police to those who legitimately protect and serve. This last point is especially true when you have people acting like there's no conflict at all because it's the easiest thing in the world to choose a side, and if you don't choose that side, you're a racist, fascist, blah 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 blah. I feel like that last point is increasingly salient. Ideologues are making people into monsters for holding even a slightly nuanced opinion, and for those facing the brunt of it, it can feel quite distressing to field such accusations. Even if you are someone who is normally reasonably confident in your views, the repeated messages of, if you believe or don't believe X, then you are a terrible person, can lead even the most secure individuals to start to second-guess themselves. It's not always as obvious as the example that I provided either. Look at this image that I just saw the other day. It's okay to change your opinion. If you've said all lives matter, today can be the first day that you say Black lives matter. If you've said the looting is horrible, today can be the first day that you say police murdering Black people is horrible. If you've said I'm white and my life is hard too, today can be the first day that you say But I understand that the color of my skin isn't something that makes my life harder. Growth and change are beautiful things. They are vulnerable, human, and good. They hurt like hell, but it's a good kind of hurt, like the soreness that comes after a productive hour at the gym. You don't have to stand by what you said yesterday if you've learned something new today. See how insidious that is? Oh, you can become a stronger and better person just as long as you align exactly with what I view as being true. I know it's hard, but you can do it. What do you mean you're a white person who worked your way up from an impoverished childhood to own your own business, who was specifically targeted by looters just because you were a white-owned business? None of that matters if you want to be a good person, you see? So what can you do about it? A few things. Sure, you can look inward and outline all your reasons for feeling the way that you do and check within yourself and with others for any personal biases. I'm not going to say that these are bad actions to take. A little introspection is healthy to better be able to ground yourself in your beliefs and your place in the world. But know your limits, and don't apologize or take on a bunch of added guilt for things that you have no control over. Not only because it will make you feel worse, but also because the people that you feel guilty for supposedly harming will often find ways to turn your guilt against you anyway, as you will see when we talk about the rest of this article. Don't feel pressured to do things for others, especially if that pressure goes against your beliefs. For example, don't let people make you feel guilty for not protesting in the middle of a pandemic. Learn the fine art of not taking the bait on social media and simply scroll past rather than engaging. Better yet, know when you've hit your limit and log off of social media entirely. Even if you want to support and help groups that you feel are in need, burnout can sneak up on you quickly and cause you to begin losing interest. Most of all, make sure that you're taking the time to care for yourselves as much as possible. Now, that's not equally possible for everyone. God knows I understand that. So don't think that you have to have a certain number of hours set aside or a certain number of tasks to do. Work within your own system. Even if you only have 10 minutes for yourself in a given day, take it. And don't let anyone make you feel like a bad person for doing it. We'll be talking a little about these and other strategies in with our discussion about the rest of the article I mentioned on tonight's episode of Men's Mental Health.